I've been debating for months about whether or not to make this video, in part because of how aggro Games Workshop gets when a fan makes something, but also in part because it's not really inside of the bounds of what I tend to upload for this channel. I have lots of different interests, and amongst them is Warhammer. Warhammer Fantasy because the Skaven are hilarious. Warhammer 40k, which is a convoluted mess of stories. Trying to nail down concrete answers is impossible, in part because Games Workshop deliberately tries to avoid writing themselves into a corner. That's not really going so well, but also in part to the fact that they've created means to do so. The Ordo Redactus of the Inquisition exists to literally censor history, so what answers readers come to is usually conjecture, evidence or not. And you know what? This is one of those videos. I have been sitting on this theory for years, and it's time I finally bring it to the forefront. The hive mind is a C'tan. Specifically, Iash'Uddra, the Endless Swarm, is the Tyranid hive mind. Yes, I said Tyranid, not Tyranid. The bugs are named after the first planet they were sighted on, Tyran, in the Ultima Segmentum. And it's Tyran from Tyrant, not Tyr the Norse god. The Imperium's naming conventions are definably Latin, and all of the Norse went into Fenris, not naming planets on the other side of the galaxy. Now why do I say Iash'Uddra is the Tyranid hive mind? Is it the name? Well, that's just what tipped me off. So I went digging, and I found more than enough circumstantial evidence to make the connection on several levels. Where did this name even come from? Iash'Uddra was first mentioned in the 5th edition Necron Codex, where there was a lore bubble from Zarek the Silent King making a statement. They came to us as gods, and we, like fools, took them at their word. Mephitran the Deceiver, Azagorod the Nightbringer, Iash'Uddra the Endless Swarm. I curse their names and the names of all of their malevolent brethren. Now that's curious, isn't it? Zarek says that Azagorod the Nightbringer and Mephitran the Deceiver are the most deserving of their hate. If you're familiar with what the Nightbringer and Deceiver did, you would fully understand why. But of all the C'tan with names, who is Iash'Uddra and why are they lumped together with two of the biggest villains in the Necron story? Mephitran is the one who convinced the Necrontyr to give up their flesh and souls for metal bodies, one certain Magpie the Infinite notwithstanding. And the Nightbringer was just a selfish asshole who treated the Necrons like slaves. But if that's how these two are top tier hate bait, then what could Iash'Uddra have done? Well, the 5e Codex came out in 2011, and there wouldn't be any more about this C'tan until 2018 in Battlefleet Gothica Armada 2. But that's for later in this theory. The next important update would be in 2020, when the 9th edition Necron Codex would be published. In it, there was a bit more said about Iash'Uddra, being described in the Book of Mournful Night. But hold on, what's the Book of Mournful Night? It's a book guarded in the Black Library of Chaos, the hidden library of the Eldar, the same library that holds the Atlas Infernal, which is a living map of the Webway, the Book of Fate, which is said to have been written by the Laughing God himself, and there's even rumors that the true name of the God Emperor is written down somewhere in one of its halls. So this place, kind of important, which makes the Book of Mournful Night important. But why? What's it about? It's said to contain the raw hatred of the ancient Necrontyr towards the old ones, which attracted the C'tans in the first place, and how the Deceiver orchestrated events that led to the war in heaven. Tzeentch, Kegarak, and Mephitran were in a three-way tug of war, and all three were pushing. Okay, so the book is important and it has historical basis for the Necrons, but what does it say about Iash'Uddra? Quote, most reviled by the unspeaking Lord was Iash'Uddra, that which was birthed in the minds of mortals, the sickness everlasting, that which walked always 3 steps behind, which saw through the eyes of all, that was named the Endless Swarm. The sorrow of the void it was that brought Iash'Uddra to the mortal brink, and severed its bonds beyond sight. In its breaking were 1,000 tides of misery released upon the stars, yet in its casket at last it lays. So fell Iash'Uddra, the Endless Swarm. Very space elf poetic because it was space elves that wrote it. But there's some very important things to take note about this C'tan in the passage. First of all, most reviled by Zarek. The Silent King hated this guy the most out of all C'tan, Iash'Uddra was the one most hated according to the book's author. That's really weird. Zarek hates a lot of things, but this is pure fuck you specifically energy we're getting. And for a character whose name has only appeared as fluff in 2 Necron codexes. Next, calling it a sickness birthed in the minds of mortals makes it sound like it's psionic in nature, but not warp-based. Saying it's always 3 steps behind and seeing through the eyes of all sounds like a glowy with backdoor access to your phone. And when Iash'Uddra was shattered, because C'tan don't technically die, they're trapped into a physical form and broken into pieces. 1,000 tides of misery were released upon the stars. And doesn't being put in a casket kind of sound like maybe the shards were put into something like a Tesseract vault? The Necrons use C'tan shards to power all sorts of things, so that wouldn't be weird. But that's a lot of conjecture, right? Nothing concrete or straightforward about it. Well, in 2024, Games Workshop would publish the Pariah Nexus Crusade, a 10th edition supplement for the tabletop game. I miss Pariahs. They were only in 3rd edition, and they were the Necrons' anti-psyker units. They were even in the first Dawn of War games. But Games Workshop replaced them with Noctilith, and now everyone's forgotten about that time Necrons would kidnap blanks and turn them into pariahs. Yeah, they did that. The Necrons would kidnap human blanks and force them through biotransference and use them as anti-psyker protection. That's canon. But the Pariah Nexus comes with its own story. In this story, on the planet of Tyranids, there was a massive battle against the Necrons by the Imperium. At some point in the battle, Magos Oradi of the Mechanicus used an ancient weapon called the Ark of Oblivion. It completely changed the tide of the war in the Imperium's favor. To this, a technomandrite of the Necrons called Eyes of the Void used a shard of Iash'Uddra, binding the fragments of thousands of canoptic constructs that turned into a ravaging swarm onto the Imperial Guard. So Iash'Udra's moniker of the Endless Swarm comes into play here. And the thing about canoptic constructs, they're all bugs. Acanthrites, leeches, locusts, scarabs, and spiders. Tomb sentinels that look like giant centipedes. It's all insects. You know what other army has bugs? Tyranids. But that's not enough, right? Well, there's 2 damning pieces of evidence that convinced me Iash'Uddra is the Tyranid hive mind. And one of them is in Battlefleet Gothica Armada 2. In this game, it blatantly states that Trazyn the Infinite personally possesses a shard of Iash'Uddra. That's huge. But why is it so important? Because in the 2017 novel Fabius Bile Clone Lord, Trazyn actually brings Fabius to his prismatic galleries, and this exchange takes place. Thus Necrontyr gave way to Necron, and we were enslaved ourselves to infinity, Trazyn rasped. Look at it, Fabius. Is it not wonderful and horrible? The star being rose, vaguely humanoid in shape, blazing with searing cosmic energies. Awful and breathtaking to behold. They ate stars, you know, and worlds besides. But we had the last laugh, in the end, Trazyn chuckled. We bound them in cages of harsh reality and used them to power our world engines. Like this place, you mean, Fabius said. One of those things is here? Yes, buried deep and safe. The crown jewel of my collection and the source of its power. Trazyn laughed again. The source of my power. Trazyn straight up tells him that a C'tan shard is the crown jewel of his collection and the source of his power. Because Trazyn has a very special power. He's unkillable. His tabletop model has the ability Surrogate Host. When this model is destroyed, instead of using any other rule that is triggered when a model is destroyed, after removing it from play, you can roll 1d6, and on a 2 or higher, you can select another friendly Necron infantry character model on the battlefield, excluding named characters, remove that model as if it were destroyed, and return this model to play. On the tabletop, if you kill Trazyn, there's a 5 in 6 chance he hijacks the body of someone else and comes right back. And it's not limited to one at a time. In the novel The Infinite and the Divine, fantastic read, when Orokin goes Super Saiyan to fight against a shard of the Deceiver, Trazyn summons 6 more of himself. The Deceiver, who is known to always have a smile on his face, sees this and stops smiling. When Orokin ate a C'tan shard and became a demigod for the fight, the Deceiver still smiled. When Trazyn brought out the boys, the Deceiver stopped smiling. Most would probably read this the way Orikin did. Quote, "I've had nightmares of this happening." But you know how I read it? Mephet Ran could feel the shard of Iash'Uddra and was worried. Okay. So all of that and you're still not convinced. But I said there's two damning pieces of evidence. If Trazyn is one, what's the other? It's the shadow in the warp. When enough psychic energy from the Tyranids is gathered together, it completely blocks out the warp. This is what's called the shadow in the warp. They don't really need to do this. They have Hive Fleet Kronos, who's evolved specifically to fight warp demons. And the warp itself doesn't seem to interfere with the psychic connections of the synapse creatures. So why would they block out the warp? Simple. Because something above them doesn't like the warp. Who wouldn't like the warp? Someone who can be harmed by it. Who can be harmed by the warp? The C'tan. The warp is the C'tan's major weakness. They can't understand it. They can't control it. They seem particularly susceptible to warp-spawned magics and psychers. So what did they do? They planned to block it off forever. Necron Codex 3rd edition, published 2002. But there's one last thing that really drives home this theory. It's what drew the Tyranids to the Milky Way galaxy in the first place. Pharos, the Dying of the Light, part of the Horus Heresy published in 2015. The Battle of Sotha took place between the Ultramarines and the Edgelords. During this battle, the Edgelords took control of a Necron structure called the Pharos. It was made of Noctilith and powered by 8 C'tan shards. And only one of those shards is confirmed to have been from Zarhulash the Potentate. The other 7 weren't confirmed to be of the same C'tan. The Pharos itself was an array for the Necron's rapid communication and FTL travel. After the heresy, Belisarius Cawl led an expedition to the planet and recovered the Pharos. Cawl discovered the device core and data core. He made contact with the enslaved shard of Zarhulash. He tricked the shard into destabilizing the device before using it to teleport to safety. In the epilogue of the novel, it's revealed that this act of overloading the Pharos is what drew the attention of the Tyranids from outside the galaxy. So we know the Pharos was powered by 8 shards. One of them was Zarhulash. What if one of those shards was from Iash'Uddra? What if several were? What if none were? We just don't know. However, I find it very interesting that it was a piece of Necron tech powered by a C'tan shard that caught the attention of the Tyranids. Out of everything that goes on in the galaxy, it was that which made them look at us. If I'm proven wrong in the future, then I'll just accept I was off the mark on this. But from what I've seen, an Eldar text telling us about who Iash'Uddra was and what happened when it died. Zarek really hates this one guy way too much for it to be normal. Trazyn and his infinite respawns. The C'tan warp allergy and the shadow in the warp. The C'tan energy that drew the Tyranids to the galaxy. Once is random chance, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern, and we're on 5 here. So what is the objective of the Tyranids? We don't know. The closest anyone has ever gotten to understanding the hive mind is Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius, and he only just barely survived trying to meld with it. There have been no other survivors who have tried. What I think is happening, I think the Tyranids fundamentally lack souls like the Necrons. I think the hive mind has a will and the hive fleet movements are not random. I think they're looking for something. I think they're looking for the shards of Iash'Uddra. C'tan don't really die. They're trapped in physical form and broken into pieces. What if Iash'Uddra is the hive mind? What if it's looking for the pieces of its body so it can be whole again? I am the NBT. This is my Tyranid theory. What do you think? Also, while I'm talking about them, Warhammer Fantasy is proof the Tyranids haven't eaten every other galaxy that exists yet. Maybe they were eating the nearby ones, but came back when something pinged them. But the fact that fantasy even exists is proof that they haven't gotten to everyone yet. Why? Because fantasy is a completely separate universe from 40k, and it's possible to travel between the two. The old ones did. That's canon. What's not canon, but kind of a reference for the players, is that there's a warp gate in the Chaos Wastes that connects to the Eye of Terror. GW being non-committal again, and the gate itself currently doesn't work, but they're giving us something. Also, the Skaven called the Eldar. The rats have nuclear-powered cell phones. They're called far squeakers, because rats. In the Thanquol and Bone Ripper anthology, there's a story called Temple of the Serpent. Thanquol invades Lustria and fights the Lizardmen, and in the process, this happens. The Warlock engineers soon discovered the device of the Great Beyond, a communication apparatus that spoke to beings from beyond the stars. They swirled its many dials. A querulous voice spoke through the stone speakers. That voice, fair and clear, caused the Skaven to bolt away. The device was something like the Far Squeaker. But the melodious tones that issued forth were, if anything, kin to the despised speech of the elf things. As they did not understand the alien language, nor how the arcane contraption worked, the Warlock engineers pulled the device apart and shot it with warp-lock pistols until it stopped making any sounds. Not only did the Lizardmen have interdimensional telephones similar to the rats' cell phones, but they accidentally called someone that sounded like an elf and spoke in an alien language. So that's 2 points connecting the two settings, and we don't even have to touch on the rainbow alphabet character for the cop-out. And for another tangent, I suspect Thanquol is secretly blessed by Tzeentch.